welcome to this week's episode of the St. Lawrence Coaches Corner. My name is Megan Nichols, and joining me today is our Director of Rowing and Head Women's Rowing Coach, Nick Hughes. Nick, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Megan.
No problem. How are things going? And I'll jump right in. And how are you and your team handling the three-semester setup this year?
Yeah, it's definitely different than any year prior. I think the biggest difference is that we don't have our full complement of athletes on campus this semester. St. Lawrence reduced campus density, and so there are some returners who just aren't here right now. In a typical year, we'd also have a big on-campus recruitment effort for walk-on rowers.
Gotcha.
And we haven't done that this year, although we do hold out hope that's something that we can do next semester. So that's presented some challenges. It's also presented some opportunities too. The limited squad size meant that we weren't as delayed as perhaps some other teams were in fully integrating our team. It was sort of a soft opening for athletics at St. Lawrence, where we were starting in small groups, and our group was already relatively small as far as squads go. So we were up and with everybody sooner rather than later, which was nice. And it also afforded us a chance to do a lot of small boat work, which can be really helpful in focusing on the technical aspects of rowing. When we have a big squad with a lot of walk-on folks, it's a lot of eights just trying to figure out how to go up and down the slide. This year, everyone who was rowing out of the boathouse already knew how to row, and so it was more about fine-tuning things to try to become more efficient.
Awesome. How has your coaching philosophy changed this year, mainly focusing on your mentality of coaching and how you lead your team, flexibility-wise,
Right.
things like that?
Sure. Well, in most years, we're focusing on preparation for competition, and while we're always a process-oriented program, it's difficult not to get caught up in what the next race is, sort of chasing boat speed. And in the absence of competition this fall, that means we've been able to take a step back and think about sort of the intrinsic value of the things that we do, right? Trying to find purpose in the absence of competition. And that's something we've talked a lot about. Coaches and athletes have talked a lot with one another about what that purpose is. Certainly this year, part of that purpose is just recreative. There's something to do when you feel like lots of things that you're accustomed to doing are just not available to you anymore. And there's a social aspect to it as well. I mean, I was riding in the launch with one of our seniors, and I said, how are things working out socially on campus for you this year? And she said, were it not for practice, I'd be having a really hard time, And so those are really important reasons why we practice this fall. But look, we're not playing a game in rowing, and so like most endurance sports, if you're having too much fun, you're probably doing it wrong. It's designed to be sort of satisfying and rewarding, but not always fun. And so how do you find purpose then, right? And for us, it was simply taking satisfaction in doing something as well as you can possibly do it, right?
Right.
And we benefit in rowing that the sport is really pretty technical. And so we can use a time like this fall to try to become as expert as we can be in pursuing technical mastery. So for any drill, any practice we did this fall, we talked about what mastery, what perfection in that drill would be, what it entails. Not just what it looks like to me or the coxswain, but more importantly, what it feels like for the rowers. Because when they get to the point where they can recognize technical mastery in the things that they're doing, then they can become self-policing and self-regulating. That they're really at that point the arbiters of athletic excellence, and that's always something that we pursue. It's just that we were able to focus on it more exclusively this fall. Now that being said, they did work on their fitness, right? I mean, that's always a part of it, and they were super creative about finding ways to make improvements in their fitness in the absence of using a lot of our traditional venues, right? So we really wanted to avoid sort of full squad training in indoor spaces. Our erg room, the weight room, we were limited by some of the safety regulations as far as that went anyway. But they did a lot of own body weight stuff. They did a lot of low volume, low intensity, high volume work. And I think those improvements in endurance will pay dividends in the long run. They also did a lot of core strength stuff and tried to improve their flexibility, mostly in the interest of injury prevention. So when we're able to ramp up both the intensity and the load, I think we're going to be able to handle it. But they can't wait to get back in the weight room, frankly. This is a squad that really takes pride in their power cleans. And so they want to show off as soon as they possibly can.
Well, you touched on my next question. So it sounds like you guys have made a good balance of focusing on technical and the physical aspects.
Yeah.
Are there certain technical things that you decided to focus on more over some of the other things maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think we try to balance two technical aspects. One is just individual efficiency, right? Are you as good as you can possibly be? But that's not sufficient in our sport, right? Because our sport is collaborative. And the project gets all the more challenging and all the more satisfying when done well, because you have to work with everyone else. And so we're constantly trying to balance what individual instruction can I give you that doesn't distract you from fitting in as seamlessly as possible with the other women in the boat, right? And to the degree that we have to pick one or the other there, Megan, we're always trying to pick the collaborative one, right? Because if you can just focus on the person in front of you and try to follow them and mirror them as nearly as you can, then assuming we got a good person leading in the stern, we're going to be doing some pretty nice things as a group.
Right. That's awesome. I know you guys have been able to get out on the water, which helped with that smaller group. How has that outlet been for all of the members of your team? You mentioned the senior that you had talked to.
Yeah.
Has that been the same for everyone? Or have you noticed anything different in that aspect?
Oh, I think the biggest difference is that we've been much more intentional about trying to practice gratitude. As an athlete, you're not entitled to victory or success even. And if last spring illustrated anything, it illustrated that you're not even entitled to an opportunity to compete in some circumstances. And so we tried to be really explicit about being grateful for the opportunity that was provided to us to get back out on the river this fall. And they said it to me and I said it to them. It was after sitting around missing my team like hell for months, I felt grateful to be able to have some athletes to work with and try to help improve. And they said it to one another. And certainly we all felt that way about the athletic department at St. Lawrence that led the way in the university's testing program that made all this possible, and also to St. Lawrence at large for allowing us to be back out on the river to continue to do a sport that we're really passionate about.
That's good. And I'm really glad that you guys were able to get back out there too. That was all I had for you today. So thanks, Nick, for joining me. And I hope all continues to go well for the rest of the semester for you and your team. And thank you to everyone for joining us for this week's episode of the St. Lawrence Coaches Corner.
Thanks. Go Saints.